Good afternoon. My name is Emerald Oteng, and the title of my research was Exploring Crime, Repeated Offense, and Criminal Imagery. And I'd like to start off by thanking my mentor, Rachel, for helping me write this paper. So the research question that I used to write this was why people commit crime and the thought process behind it. Before I start, a little introduction about me is that my name is Emerald, of course. I'm 17 and I'm a senior in high school. I live in Hagerstown, Maryland, and fun fact is that I have a missing tooth which is still stuck in my gums today. And some of my hobbies are running, reading, baking, and writing poetry, and also listening to true crime podcasts. So a little overview about what I'll be talking about today is section 1 will be mostly about the brain. Section 2 will be about fantasy versus reality, which will make more sense in a second. Section 3 is kind of the solution to my research question as to why people continue to commit crimes. As I was researching why people commit crimes, I came across the term criminal recidivism. And criminal recidivism basically means the tendency of a crime to reoccur by a specific individual. Now, the reason for this is very complex, and we will go into this, but I've narrowed it down to three main things, which is environment, genetics, and support systems. Now, our thought processes are impacted by a variety of components, and genes specifically have a great impact on how we regulate those. In criminals, low levels of what is known as monoamine oxidase, and I'll be saying MAOA just to shorten it, cause them to exhibit aggressive and abnormal behaviors. MAOA is an enzyme that is encoded in the monoamine gene, and it regulates our emotions and cognitions. Having low levels of this is also known as Brenner syndrome, and many individuals often find themselves in this situation because of their upbringing, which is mainly violent and toxic environments which are prone to creating adults with lower levels of MAOA. Different environments can also cause genes to show up differently within people, and also gender, as the MAOA gene is found in the X chromosome, and since women have more X chromosomes than men, they are less likely to exhibit aggressive behavior because they have higher levels of MAOA. Now, some character traits that are associated with those who have lower levels of MAOA are also synonymous with those who are more likely to induce criminal behavior are being more antisocial and isolated. As without the MAOA enzyme, it's almost impossible to regulate emotions, and there is a surplus of dopamine release, making decision-making hard for an individual. Now, in regards to the brain, the prefrontal cortex is where most of our high-level and complex decisions are made. And within that, there are two systems. We have the behavioral activation system and the behavioral inhibition system. Now, the behavioral activation system, it feeds off of dopamine, and it allows us to seek whatever provides us these, dopamine to enact things that rewards basically. And when there is a higher activation in the behavioral activation system, there is lower levels of MAOA because there aren't any enzymes to regulate those emotions. Now, the behavioral inhibition system is the complete opposite and allows us to be more fearful of the consequences of our actions. And that system is more active when there are higher levels of MAOA. Second two is fantasy to reality. Now, many criminals take time in calculating how they will commit a crime. At times, almost a year is spent in preparation, and it all starts from a single thought. As I did mention earlier, many murders are often subject to unfortunate backgrounds, and in doing so, they build up resentment not only towards their abusers, but also towards society as a whole. And they create a kind of alternate reality inside their mind in which they live in to enact violent and very strange acts where they are the most dominant and well-liked person, which contrasts their actual reality. And as time goes on, it becomes hard to differentiate between what is real and what is fake. And they can't cope off of these fake imaginations and need to actually bring those violent acts into reality. And the process that they use to do so is first to become close with the victim, which is called relational, where they meet the victim, maybe befriend them. And the next is paraphilia, where they enact these sexual desires they might have in their head onto actual people. The third is situational, where they find out maybe where they want to carry out the murder, the time and the place, etc. And the fourth is self-perception, so they actually imagine themselves enacting the murder. So after the first murder, the amount of dopamine release is calculated to be around 10 times the normal amount And in combination with the fact that most criminals have lower levels of MAOA, it creates an individual who craves that feeling of dopamine more and more. It becomes almost like a drug in which they can't survive with those fantasies. And without those fantasies, they have to face reality. This cycle is called cyclical mechanism, which is activated from the constant cycle from reality to fantasies and so on. And referring back to the behavioral activation system is highly active in this time because it's constantly urging them to push forward and seek more ways that they can release this dopamine, which is why they continue killing and killing. And now the solution. As I said, my research question was, why do people commit crimes? And I've come to the conclusion that it is mainly a combination of mental distortion and also lack of resources from mental institutions. The National Institute of Justice actually found that child abuse and neglect increase the odds of adult criminality by over 29%. So punishment alone is not going to work as they are used to a life of hardship. And though they cannot enact these fantasies anymore, once they are released, they will. In fact, a review of data from 30 states found that 70% of prisoners released were rearrested for that same crime within 3 years, and 75 were rearrested for that same crime in 5 years. Prisons that do have mental health resources do not use them well and are more focused on deinstitutionalization. In fact, McLean Hospital claimed that 63% of those who were suffering with mental health issues did not have their issues addressed. So the lack of collaboration between the mental health departments and the justice departments is what causes criminal recidivism to worsen. Thank you for listening to my presentation.
Thank you so much for sharing more about your research. So again, as a reminder, if you have any questions, feel free to add them to the Q&A kind of section. You might find it under the More tab in your Zoom. But to get us started, I'd love to just hear a little more about kind of what got you interested in this topic and how you came about this research question.
Okay, so I had, I think it was a show had just come out it was a documentary about Jeffrey Dahmer, and I was watching it, and I think I like watching his mannerisms and the way he acted. It didn't seem like he was very sorrowful, so I was kind of like confused as to why he did like such horrible things, but he didn't seem to show that he was sorry. So I kind of wanted to understand more about why, people did act in those ways.
Very cool. And then also, I'm kind of interested. You talked a little about maybe some of the biological mechanisms that might contribute to criminal behavior. I'm curious, kind of what you think the balance of nature versus nurture, kind of how much is this something that is people's environment and what they're exposed to versus their biology?
I would say it's more of the environment because a lot of the times, as I said, the way that genes act or within you is very dependent on your environment and where you are. So, like as I said before, those who were brought up in more violent areas had lower levels of monoamine oxidase in their system, and also genetically, I mean, when you think of nurture, it could be as men do have lower levels of it, but I think overall it definitely is the more nature than nurture.
And then I'm curious, do you also think, you talked a little about mental health treatment and things like that, but do you think there are ways to sort of reverse some of that, the kind of nature, nurture, environment kind of combination?
Yeah, I think that there just needs to be more awareness about it because most people, obviously, I don't think they regard mental health as an issue when it comes to like criminal acts. They just assume that, oh, the person was just evil, which in some cases is very true, but not in all cases. So I think there just needs to be more input and more research into what mental health resources could be provided.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for your presentation and sharing more about your research.